The story begins in a small town in China where we see a restaurant. The owner of this restaurant was a person named Lang Kai. He stood there with his team bustling around him. On the other hand, we came across a food production establishment. This establishment has been renowned for its cuisine for the past 20 years. Its name was Harmonious Food Corporation, and its president was Mr. Kai. So, Kai told Mr. Lang that the food he prepared at his establishment was absolutely awful. Being a chef, it didn't embarrass you at all to create such tasteless food. Mr. Lang then responds with a sharp retort. He tells him that it is precise because his food is delicious, and he criticizes it so that Mr. Kai can take over his restaurant. Because this has been his dream for many days. Upon hearing this, Mr. Kai becomes intensely angry and proposes a bizarre competition to Mr. Lang. The rule of this competition is that whoever can create the most tasteless food here, and if the competitors who eat the tasteless food fall ill, that person will be the winner of the competition, and that winner will be able to take over the restaurant. Mr. Lang then agrees to Mr. Kai's proposal for this bizarre competition. Lang believes in a saying with all his heart, that the one who can cook the best food can also cook the worst. Because when it comes to food, no one understands it better than a chef. Now, as his opponent in the cooking competition, Madame Jiang is chosen. She is a member of Mr. Kai's team. This woman used to cook so badly in the school cafeteria that the students lost interest in eating her food. But even then, they would sometimes fall asleep after eating. Her poorly cooked food was served as a punishment to the students so that they would study well and eventually get a chance to attend good universities. As they continued to eat the tasteless food, they couldn't understand how they could ever get a chance. Within moments, the competition to create the most tasteless food began with excitement and tension. Both sides tried their best culinary skills. Then came the exchange of dishes with poorly prepared food. However, the smell of Jiang's cooking made everyone feel sick. It was evident that when Jiang tasted Leah's prepared food, her condition deteriorated rapidly. In an instant, she went from being healthy to becoming ill. Some people came and took her away. Mr. Lang then started to think of himself as the winner because his opponent had fallen ill after eating his cooked food. So, according to the rules of the game, the victory was rightfully his. And when she was about to celebrate her victory, she turned around and saw that something unusual had happened. She noticed that the monstrously awful monster chili dish had been easily consumed by a boy. The boy finished eating the monster chili dish. It seemed to her that the food tasted very delicious to him. Then we come to know that the boy's name is Little Fish. He was a member of Mr. Kai's team. So, Mr. Kai wins and Mr. Lee loses, according to the rules of the competition for Little Fish's ability to withstand eating the food. The reason Mr. Kai took over her restaurant was actually because Little Fish's taste test was very bad, so he could handle any kind of food and finish it. That's why Mr. Kai sent Little Fish to the competition. That's why Mr. Kai challenged Mr. Lee to cook tasteless food. Mr. Kai had actually been searching for a revolutionary recipe for many years. Once he found it, he would become the biggest businessman in the food industry. That's why he constantly traveled to famous and upscale restaurants and wandered from restaurant to restaurant with his team. And there, using his skills, he offered the chefs the offer of participating in all kinds of cooking competitions. Then, according to the contract, he takes over the restaurants and wants to learn from them. His goal was to discover these recipes and become the king of the world of food. But so far, he hasn't found any recipe to his liking. Like every time, Mr. Kai fails again because he couldn't find any recipe at Mr. Lang's restaurant. Then he becomes somewhat disappointed and tells his companion Little Fish that if he can find him a revolutionary recipe, he will pay him a lot of money. Hearing this, Little Fish agrees and gets to work with the help of a friend. But, as the events unfold, it is seen that Mr. Lang loses in the competition due to a theft inflicted by Little Fish, because he was very angry with them. But this didn't cause much harm to Little Fish. In the next scene, we see Little Fish operating a computer while his friend is stitching up his back. Little Fish's friend's name was Julian, who was his childhood friend. While stitching, he accidentally cuts another place on his back. But Little Fish doesn't feel any pain at all. Actually, Little Fish had lost his mother at a very young age, and the grief of losing her at such a young age had damaged his nervous system. Since then, he no longer feels any pain in his body. Even if someone hits him and cuts him with a knife, he doesn't feel any pain. Then it is seen that he scans a QR code and finds the address of a secret recipe. After determining the location, they decide to go there. Then, after gathering everything, the two friends set out to find the recipe. They reach the address and find that it's a shopping mall. Still, they continue to search the shopping mall like detectives for the recipe. Despite spending the whole day searching for the secret recipe, they couldn't find any trace of it. Eventually, as the shopping mall closes, they get stuck there, unable to find a way out. And from there, they discover a whole new world. Because inside such a big shopping mall, they come across a small, traditional place. Perhaps they found the location by scanning a QR code. There, starting from many old books, they find everything. So maybe they can find some traditional recipes in this place. Then, Little Fish sets out in search of the recipe and arrives at a noodle shop named Jerry Handsome, owned by a person named Huang. Huang shows them quite a few collections of adult books because he thinks those are what young men like them need. But Little Fish tells him, "We didn't come to buy those books. Actually, if you have any secret recipe books, we've come to buy those." Then the man shows them some more extreme adult books. Little Fish understands that maybe this old man is not much of a help. Perhaps they've come to the wrong place. So, he takes Zhu Xian and they leave the shop. A few moments later, they see Huang has transformed into a Hawaiian-dressed monk. Then Huang makes Little Fish and Zhu Xian act crazy and starts telling them stories there. As Huang tells them these stories, Little Fish begins to understand that Huang is actually making fun of them. Because of the place where Huang was sitting, Little Fish noticed that his stick was raised, resembling a steel tool. It was attached to his stick, and he wasn't a Hawaiian-dressed monk at all. He had assumed the appearance of a monk to collect money from them, so Little Fish wants his money back. At that moment, Mr. Kai arrives there, and his men start causing chaos, spreading out across the entire area. In reality, they have come here to search for secret recipes, and Little Fish hides when he sees Mr. Kai because he hasn't been able to find the secret recipe in time. Now, to calm Mr. Kai down, the locals offer a different protest. They cook their best dishes and bring them in front of Kai. They present their dishes beautifully. Indeed, the area was very popular for its cooking, so everyone here knows how to cook well. However, even after several years of cooking these dishes, they couldn't satisfy Mr. Kai's taste. Seeing these dishes, a girl who works for Mr. Kai can't help but secretly mock them. However, even after that, Mr. Kai tasted the food, and this recipe was so tender and flavorful that it felt like every bite was melting in the mouth. The delicious food reminded Mr. Kai of his past, and from there, he returned to his school life. Later, Kai brings up the topic of shrimp fish, a bus in his mouth, and this dish was so delicious and spicy that it reminded Kai of his mother's words. Looking towards the latest dish, Kai seems to lose himself in the memories of his youthful days, where we see Kai and some of his friends, who, together, put in extraordinary effort for 7 days using some very basic ingredients to create a good recipe. Now, we return to the present time, where these foods have impressed Kai so much that it seems like he has revisited every step of his life. Actually, here, a strong bond between people and food is demonstrated. But until Kai conquers the place by eating good food, he doesn't find peace. So, on his way out, Kai instructs his secretary to do what it takes to infiltrate the place. That is, to break in and infiltrate what is required to be done. So, to infiltrate, Kai's people do exactly what he says. They start breaking in there as they wish, and at that very moment, a girl named Mano comes there. This girl is known as the toughest girl here, and is known to everyone more than Kai's people, and she saves everyone there. Actually, Mano was Huang's stepsister, whose mother had left her when she was very young. Although her mother had mentioned working in NASA's space program before leaving, Mano has come to know later through gossip that her mother has actually left her to go with someone else. Here, Mano, after being beaten, initially falls behind Kai, and his gang then tries to attack Kai, ordering another group called the Fantastic Four to attack them. But Mano's fighting skills were so good that she couldn't be defeated by the Fantastic Four, and instead, they ended up fleeing from there. However, from a distance they ignite a cylinder and shoot it straight towards Manu, but she skillfully deflects it towards the Fantastic Four, forcing them to retreat. Meanwhile, we see Little Fish coming towards Manu. In fact, she wanted to take advantage of this opportunity to beat Manu and seize these secret recipes. So, in order to impress Mr. Kai takes a baton to beat Manu, who advances towards her with a stick, unaware of it all. But even though Little Fish went there as a member of Kai's gang, she ended up injuring herself while trying to protect Mano from the cylinder. Moments later, When Little Fish regains consciousness, he finds himself in Mano's house. Little Fish is quite surprised by this turn of events. He couldn't understand how he ended up here. In reality, Mano had brought him here, repeatedly asking her why she had brought him here. He even threatened to hand him over to the police. But then he kept telling Mano to calm down, admitting her ignorance and asking what happened until she regained her senses. Actually, Little Fish's plan here was to get closer to Mano a bit more. Because he had initially crashed into Mano, Little Fish could understand here that he had been given CPR to bring his knowledge back. Upon hearing about the CPR, Little Fish becomes somewhat agitated. He thinks that perhaps Mano was given CPR by Tak. But he can understand that Tak has given him CPR, not Mano, due to the words of his grandfather, Huang. Hearing this, he becomes angry and wants to leave from there. Initially, Mano suspected Little Fish was one of Kai's spies. However, Little Fish assures her that he is not Kai's spy, and presents various arguments on this matter. He says that if he were Kai's spy, why would he save Mano? This should make Mano understand that he is not a spy. Upon hearing this, everyone believes that Little Fish is not part of Kai's team. Little Fish survives this journey, and now no one doubts him anymore. He can understand from their words that Mano's grandfather, Huang, has famous recipes, and if he can acquire them, Little Fish will be in good standing with Kai. He might even be able to get a lot of money from Kai. And then, right at that moment, his friend Jusian arrives there. And here, he tells him the news of winning a lottery ticket to take him out so that no one can suspect them. Seizing this opportunity, Little Fish goes outside the house and calls Kai to inform him that he has found a famous recipe. And it's the very recipe that Mr. Kai has been searching for days. Hearing this, Kai becomes very happy and tells Little Fish to do whatever it takes to win Mano over. And he sets out to search for the recipe in the Trap of Love. Just as Little Fish had planned, he impresses Mano in such a way that he gains his trust and starts to enact the role of love with him. Consequently, he easily manages to obtain the recipe from her. Little Fish tells Mano that from the moment he first sees him, he has been falling in love with her. Even for Mano's sake, he can do anything. Hearing all this, Mano stands there for a moment, deeply moved. When Little Fish proposes to her for the first time, she is completely taken aback. However, Mano's grandfather, Huang, is very pleased to see that anyone desires to love a girl like Mano. Here, we can see that Man gradually starts to develop affection for Little Fish. That day, they both talked a lot and shared each other's sorrows. Man said that in childhood, she used to feel hungry at noon because her mother had left. But as she grew up, she gradually came to know that her mother had actually left with another person. But which one is true? That is still unknown to her. Hearing Man's story, Little Fish then tells her his own story. He says his mother used to work in a factory and would bring good food for Little Fish every day, even if he didn't eat herself. On the other hand, due to their financial situation, he often became a victim of bullying by other children at school. When he would come home beaten, his mother would inspire him with the courage to fight and survive alongside everyone. Little Fish couldn't tolerate spicy food at all, but due to being poor, his mother used to make burgers for him with spices. But one day, Little Fish's mother suddenly passed away, which shattered him deeply. Since then, he gradually became emotionally numb, his nervous system shutting down, making him unable to feel any pain. Hearing Little Fish's words, Man feels very sorry, comforts Little Fish, and refrains from making him feel worse. It is here that Man truly begins to develop genuine feelings for Little Fish. On the other hand, we see Kay trying to steal the secret recipe kept by Huang. For this purpose, he hires samurai from Japan. The specialty of this samurai is that he can move very swiftly. The samurai then sneaks away to Huang's shop with the intention of taking the recipe from him. When he arrives there, Jiang, Mei, and Inchung are preparing food and serving it in front of him. They actually mistook him for a customer at their restaurant. However, Samurai cleverly remarks that the food preparation has taken longer than expected, and they could make faster food than theirs. Hearing this, they get offended and challenge the samurai to a cooking competition where they are given 3 minutes, a time constraint previously agreed upon. It's worth noting that one of the samurai's weaknesses was a condition called OCD. Those affected by this condition become overly obsessed with certain tasks. Then Man and Little Fish repeatedly placed a cup and spoon on a table in disarray, exploiting this weakness. Meanwhile, The samurai was busy beautifying the plate on that table, abandoning his task. In reality, whenever he returned to cook food, they went there and saw that his knife was missing. Instead of the knife, Mon and Little Fish handed him tissue paper. But even after trying to use the tissue, another disaster awaited him. He kept trying repeatedly because due to not being able to release the tissue, his head was getting hot. It was a kind of mental problem for him, so he kept trying to release the tissues equally. As he continued to do these tasks, a lot of time was spent within the 3 minutes he had. Here, what samurai needed to prepare the dish was a perfect shape. So he ran to a nearby building and there, he turned the switch on and off to create a love shape similar to that of his food presentation. Mon has sustained injuries, so Little Fish applies medicine to his wounds. Although Little Fish had no feelings at that moment, he couldn't help but burst into tears. Mon shows even more empathy towards him, revealing that she had known about his problems long ago. So, he leans on Mon's shoulder, revealing that Mon had fallen in love with Little Fish long before. Mon expresses her love for Little Fish and gives him a jacket, which is a symbol of their family bond. Then, Little Fish tells Mon that he wants to see that famous recipe, something he has wished for a long time. Mon then tells him that the recipe is with her grandfather, who always keeps it under close watch because it's a tradition in their family, something neither Mon nor her grandfather has ever shown to anyone. After a while, Little Fish communicates with Kay and tells him where the recipe is actually kept. After this incident, a few months pass, and now Little Fish and his team work at the restaurant, much to everyone's delight. After much hardship, they have regained their beloved restaurant. Please subscribe to Use for more.